Why was she so calm when everyone else fidgeted under pressure? Maybe it was because Sarah Martinez had grown used to silence. Silence in the shop. Silence in her own life. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but heavy, filled with memory, discipline, and the steady rhythm of habit. That Tuesday afternoon in Montana, she was doing the one thing that made sense to her when the rest of the world felt unpredictable: cleaning rifles. Her hands moved with a precision born from years of practice, disassembling, polishing, reassembling. It wasn't just about the metal. It was about control, about keeping chaos at bay. Her father had taught her that. He was a Marine sniper, the kind of man who believed in details. "Every mistake leaves a mark," he'd told her once, showing her how even a speck of powder residue could throw off a shot. When he died in a car accident, she buried herself in that lesson. If she couldn't control the way life unraveled, she could at least control the shine of steel and the crisp click of a bolt sliding into place. The bell above the shop door chimed. Sarah didn't look up immediately. Customers came and went. Most wanted the same things: quick fixes, hunting advice, a replacement scope they'd brag about but never learned to use properly. She kept her eyes on the rifle in front of her, cloth sliding over the barrel, solvent cutting through residue. But this customer was different. She felt it before she saw it. The sound of boots that made no sound. The stillness that wasn't casual but deliberate. Whoever had walked in wasn't browsing. When Sarah finally looked up, her gaze met a man who carried the weight of years on his face, and the calm of someone who had seen worse things than this quiet shop. His skin was weathered, his clothes unremarkable, but his presence filled the room. His eyes scanned corners instinctively before resting on her. He didn't speak at first. He just watched her work with the kind of patience most people didn't bother with. He studied her hands, her movements, the way she handled each piece like it mattered. Sarah broke the silence. "Can I help you with something?" His voice was low, measured. "I heard there was someone here who really knows their way around precision shooting." It wasn't a compliment, it was a statement, a test. She shrugged, setting the rifle down carefully. "I do my job well." A faint nod, as if he appreciated the lack of boasting. "I'm looking for someone with very specific skills, someone who understands more than just the mechanics, someone who knows the art of precision at distances most people can't even imagine." Sarah studied him. He had the posture of a soldier, the quiet confidence of someone used to high-stakes decisions. He introduced himself simply: "Marcus Thompson." Her pulse quickened. Precision. Distances most people couldn't imagine. This wasn't about hunting rifles. This was something else. She asked carefully, "What kind of distances?" Marcus leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "The kind where wind, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the earth matter. The kind where success or failure is measured in fractions of inches, thousands of meters away." Thousands. Sarah's throat tightened. She had read about shots like that, studied the math, the physics. She'd even run her own calculations at night, pages of scribbles and ballistic charts. But those were theories. She'd never had the chance to test them. Her longest confirmed shot was barely half that. Marcus pulled something from his pocket, a photograph. He set it on the counter face down. "Before we go further, I need to know, is this just a hobby for you or are you serious?" The word hobby stung. Shooting wasn't a pastime. It was her way of breathing, her way of holding on to her father's memory. She steadied her voice. "I take it very seriously. I've been studying long-range precision for years. Ballistics, environmental factors, all of it. But I've never had the facilities or the equipment to test myself the way you're describing." Marcus flipped the photo. It showed a target, 3,800 meters away, timestamped just weeks ago. Several bullet holes clustered near the center. Her eyes widened. 3,800 meters, she almost whispered it. "That's beyond anything I've ever tried." Wind alone would be a nightmare at that distance. The smallest mistake would send the round feet off target, yet someone had done it, repeatedly. Marcus studied her reaction. The shooter who made that shot has been training for over 15 years, working with equipment most people have never even heard of. But here's the thing, he paused. We're looking for someone who can match or exceed that, given the right training. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest. Exhilaration, fear, both tangled. What makes you think I could? Marcus's eyes didn't waver. I've been watching you, not just today. I know about the range you practice at, the records you've set quietly. People talk. You may not compete, but your accuracy has already made its way to people like me. She didn't like the thought of being watched, her privacy invaded, but a deeper part of her felt seen. He slid a card across the counter. Plain, with only a number and the words Advanced Training Solutions. The training is in Colorado, Marcus explained. Not on any public map. 3 to 4 months if you're as quick as I think you are, but it won't just be about shooting. It will push everything you are. And when it's done, you'll have choices. Government work, private security, or you can walk away but with skills very few people in the world will ever touch. Sarah turned the card over, feeling the weight of it in her hand. Her father would have told her not to waste an opportunity like this. He would have told her that talent meant nothing if you didn't test it. Still, she asked, "What aren't you telling me?" Marcus's smile was faint, almost approving. That this isn't about trophies. It's about moments where failure isn't an option. For a long moment, the shop was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. Sarah's world had been small. Rifles, Montana, routine. But the photo on the counter, 3,800 meters, impossible and yet real, pulled at something inside her. She didn't answer him right away, because she knew the truth. One word could change everything. That night she couldn't sleep. She cleaned her rifle twice, checked and rechecked her zero, read every article she could find on extreme long-range shooting until the words blurred on the screen. Her mind spun with questions. By dawn she was already driving, dirt roads cutting into the Montana wilderness, a folded piece of paper with directions beside her. Marcus had given her a time, 6:00 a.m., a demonstration, a glimpse into the world he was offering. She didn't know what waited for her in that valley. Only that tomorrow, silence might no longer be enough. What kind of place hides in the wilderness with no signs, no maps, no name? That question followed Sarah as her truck bounced along narrowing dirt roads, the early morning light spilling over pine ridges. She gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, knuckles pale against the leather. In the passenger seat, her rifle case sat buckled in like a passenger, the one constant she trusted. The coordinates Marcus had given her felt more like a riddle than an address. She half expected to find nothing but a clearing or an abandoned shack. Yet when she crested the last rise, a cluster of weathered buildings appeared below. From the outside, they looked like any forgotten ranch, peeling paint, rusting fences, roofs sagging from too many winters. But her gut told her, appearances lied. Marcus was already waiting in the dirt lot, 2 men standing with him. One older, stiff-backed, eyes sharp like a hawk. The other younger, lean, scanning her gear as she pulled up. Soldiers or former soldiers, she didn't need to ask. Marcus greeted her simply. "Sarah, this is Colonel Johnson and Staff Sergeant Williams. They'll be observing today." Johnson's handshake was firm, assessing. "Marcus has told us you've got potential. Let's see if it's true." Williams just gave her a nod, but his eyes said more. Judgment already forming. He'd seen shooters before, he'd measured them in seconds, and Sarah could feel herself under the microscope. She swallowed the sting of nerves and followed them inside. The building didn't match the exterior. Where she expected dust and neglect, she found sophistication. Rows of monitors, weather instruments, topographic maps glowing on screens. The room overlooked a valley that stretched for miles, wide, open, unforgiving. "This range extends past 4 kilometers," Marcus explained, gesturing to the glass. Targets at varying distances. All monitored, all recorded, nothing subjective, everything measured. Sarah set her rifle case down, her heart beating harder now. The familiar sound of clasps opening steadied her. She assembled her custom .338 Lapua Magnum, the rifle she trusted, the one she had built with her own hands. Metal on wood, scope locking into place. Her anchor. Colonel Johnson motioned toward the firing position near the windows. "We'll start at 800 meters." 800. Sarah almost smiled. That was comfort territory. She slid behind the scope, the stock settling against her shoulder like it belonged there. The crosshairs wavered on the first steel silhouette. Her breathing slowed, her father's voice in memory whispering, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." The shot cracked through the still morning. Steel rang faint in the distance. Then again, and again. Tight grouping, near perfect. Johnson's voice was even, solid, now 1200. The wind was different at that distance. She read it in the shimmer of heat, the slight sway of grass. Adjusted, squeezed, fired. Impacts clustered, respectable. William said nothing, but Sarah caught the small raise of his eyebrow. Approval, reluctant but real. 1500 meters. This was stretching her rifle, stretching her comfort. Her calculations slowed, each click of adjustment carrying weight. Shots landed wide at first, then narrowed as she corrected. She exhaled, unsatisfied, not good enough. That's when Marcus leaned in. "Now let us show you what's possible." Williams rolled out a heavy black case, longer than any rifle box she'd seen. When the latches opened, Sarah's breath caught. The weapon inside wasn't a rifle. It was a system. Steel machined with uncompromising precision, a barrel like a spear, optics so large they seemed impossible to carry. A bipod built more like lab equipment than field gear. "This," Williams said, reverent, "is a .416 Barrett, 400-grain bullet, over 3,000 feet per second, integrated ballistic computer. Smart scope compensating for wind, temperature, even the Coriolis effect." Colonel Johnson's voice carried the gravity of experience. "Cost more than most homes, but when failure isn't an option, cost doesn't matter." They set it up before her, the scope glowing with a display of numbers, lines, shifting calculations she barely understood yet. Williams began inputting environmental data, adjusting the mount with practiced hands. Sarah leaned closer. "Who's shooting it?" Williams stepped back. "You are." Her stomach nodded. She never touched a rifle like this. "I don't know the system. I'd need weeks." "That's what training is for," Johnson interrupted. "Your fundamentals are strong. Trust those. Let the equipment handle the math." They explained the basics. The scope fed her a corrected aim point, adjusting for countless factors she'd normally calculate herself. Still, it came down to her trigger, her control. The machine could do everything else, but she had to fire clean. Target, 2,500 meters. She eased behind the weapon. It felt heavier, more alive than anything she'd held. The recoil pad braced against her shoulder like it knew secrets. The scope magnified a tiny speck of steel far beyond what her own rifle could reach. She breathed, 1-2, held, pressed the trigger until it broke. The thunder of the shot rattled her bones. Through the scope, dust lifted near the target. She couldn't tell where it hit. Her pulse raced. Williams checked the monitor. His voice broke into a grin. "Center ring, less than 2 inches off bullseye, at 2,500. Sarah froze, her hand still on the rifle. Pride surged. Fear too. That had felt impossible, yet she'd done it. First shot, unfamiliar weapon. She asked quietly, "Show me." The monitor displayed it clear, almost perfect impact. Numbers didn't lie. Marcus leaned in, eyes locked on her. "Now let's talk about 3,800. The number hit harder than the recoil. 3,800 meters. The range that had seemed mythical just yesterday. Williams adjusted the system, calibrating again. On the scope display, the target was barely visible, a fleck against the horizon. Even with magnification, it looked like a ghost. This distance, Johnson said, is where human skill and technology meet. The system calculates, but the shooter must still be flawless. One twitch, one breath too soon, and it's gone. This time, Williams took the shot himself. His routine was methodical, practiced. Monitors tracked wind at multiple points along the bullet's imagined path. He exhaled, fired. 4 seconds of waiting. Then the monitor blinked green, direct hit. Sarah stared at the screen. She had seen it with her own eyes now. It wasn't myth, it was possible. And for the first time, she believed she could do it too. The drive back later was quiet. Her rifle case sat beside her, but the familiar weight felt different now, almost small. She kept seeing the monitor, the dust cloud, the numbers. By the time she reached town, her decision was already made. That evening, she dialed the number on Marcus's card. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. "I want in," she said simply. "When do we start?" What kind of place demanded silence, even from the mountains around it? That was Sarah's first thought when the plane touched down on the private airstrip carved between jagged Colorado peaks. The runway looked temporary, stitched into the valley floor, but the precision of its design revealed otherwise. Nothing about this facility was ordinary. She stepped down into cold alpine air that smelled of pine and iron. The valley was vast, isolated, a world cut off from the rest. The buildings ahead weren't marked, no signs, no flags, just stone-gray structures folded into the landscape like they were hiding. Marcus met her there. His words were brief. "From here on out, nothing is the same." The truth of it hit as soon as she walked into the compound. Trainees, men and women, all lean, sharp-eyed, carrying the kind of tension that comes from lives already spent in hard places. She caught bits of their conversations, acronyms she didn't know, deployments she couldn't picture. They weren't here to play. They weren't here to learn for fun. And then she realized something. She was the only one without a uniform history. No combat tour, no ribbons, just Sarah, the gunsmith from Montana with a reputation whispered but untested. For a moment it burned her stomach like shame. She could already hear their doubts. What's she doing here? Who let her in? Her first instructor silenced even those thoughts. Captain Rodriguez, former Marine sniper. His presence hit like a wall, not loud, not aggressive, but unshakable. His eyes scanned trainees the way a surgeon studies anatomy, cool, exact, already knowing where to cut. He spoke without a smile. "Forget what you think you know. We're going to rebuild you from the ground up." Day one began before the sun touched the peaks. 4 a.m. wake-up, physical conditioning that chewed through lungs and legs alike. Runs at altitude where the air was thin and sharp, push-ups until shoulders screamed, ruck marches that seemed endless. Sarah's body fought every step, but she refused to quit. She remembered her father's words, "Pain doesn't last, discipline does." Then came the classroom hours, advanced ballistics, meteorology, equations sprawling across boards, numbers dancing between wind drift, bullet drop, humidity, spin drift, even how the Earth's rotation bent a shot. Sarah filled notebooks with formulas, her handwriting fierce and cramped. Some nights she studied until her vision blurred. Afternoons were for the range. Rows of rifles, each more advanced than the last. Some looked like machines torn from the future, their precision terrifying. At first, Sarah stuck to her fundamentals, letting muscle memory guide her breathing and trigger squeeze. But the instructors demanded more. "Don't just shoot," Rodriguez barked one afternoon. "Interpret, read, understand the environment before you even chamber a round." She learned to watch mirage lines through the scope, to read the subtle bend of grass at half a mile away, to measure seconds between gusts of wind. It was less like shooting and more like speaking a new language, the language of the invisible. But it wasn't smooth. Some nights she left the range humiliated. Shots that had landed near perfect at home scattered wide here. Her body ached, her mind swirled with too many numbers. And worse, she could feel the eyes of the others, the doubt heavy in their silence. Williams in particular, the younger soldier she'd met at the demonstration range, seemed to measure her failures with quiet satisfaction. Doubt clawed at her. Was she out of her depth, just a civilian playing at soldier? The lowest point came at the end of her second week. The wind shifted erratically, gusts that turned her corrections into guesses. She missed the target completely, not once but 3 times in a row. The silence from the observation booth stung more than any word. She lowered her rifle, throat tight. That night she sat alone in her barracks room, rifle laid across her knees. For the first time she considered quitting, packing her bags, pretending this had never happened. But then she remembered her father's voice again. Perfection isn't about never missing. It's about never leaving the fight unfinished. The next morning she was the first on the range. Alone in the cold dawn she worked, not for approval, not to silence doubters, just to prove something to herself. Day by day, something shifted. Her shots tightened again. Calculations became less mechanical, more intuitive. Where once she scrambled through data, now she read the wind like second nature. Rodriguez noticed. "You're progressing faster than most," he said during one review. His tone was not warm, but his words carried weight. "Natural ability plus work ethic, that's dangerous, in a good way." Still, the standard never softened. Every mistake was magnified, every lapse punished. She learned to carry exhaustion like armor, to steady her hands even when her arms shook from drills, to clear her mind when doubt tried to creep back in. And slowly something else emerged, pride. Not loud, not boastful, quiet pride. The kind that grows when you realize you've survived what should have broken you. By the end of the second month, Sarah was doing what once seemed impossible. Shots over 3,000 meters began to land consistently. Not every time, not yet, but enough to turn heads, enough to silence whispers. And yet she wasn't satisfied. Because the real test was coming. The one number that haunted every trainee in the valley, 3,800. Rodriguez reminded them of it often. 3800 is the line. Make that shot and you're not just good. You're among the best in the world. Fewer than 50 shooters have done it. It isn't about luck. It's about mastery. Sarah carried that number with her like a weight, a promise, a challenge. Each morning as the cold air cut her lungs, she asked herself the same question. Will I be one of them? Or will I be the name no one remembers? The answer she knew would come soon. Why did the number haunt her even in her sleep? 3,800. The digits carved themselves into Sarah's mind like they were branded on the inside of her eyelids. At night, she dreamed of wind gusts and bullet drop, of steel targets vanishing into fog. She'd wake with her hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The instructors had stopped saying it like a challenge. They said it like a verdict. 3800 was the measure of worth. It wasn't optional. It was nice to achieve. It was the gate every trainee had to pass through, or they didn't belong here. Rodriguez reminded them in his calm, ruthless way. At this range, every choice is magnified. Every breath matters. You either respect the distance or it buries you. For weeks, Sarah trained with that weight pressing on her. Days blurred together. Dawn runs in thin mountain air, classroom lectures on transonic ballistics, hours behind scopes that felt heavier with each session. Her notebook filled with scribbles of formulas, corrections, margins littered with self-reminders. Don't rush. Watch mirage. Trust fundamentals. But training wasn't just math and steel. It was human. Williams was always watching. The younger staff sergeant, sharp-eyed, skeptical, never missing a chance to question her place here. He never said it outright, but the look in his eyes said enough. You don't belong. You haven't earned this the way we have. She ignored it, or tried to. But sometimes, when her shots landed just outside the circle, she'd catch his faint smirk. It cut deeper than she wanted to admit. One evening, while the others unwound in the mess hall, Williams cornered her near the range. "You're good," he said flatly. "But good isn't enough here. 3800 eats people alive. You don't just walk in from Montana and conquer it." Sarah met his stare, calm, steady. "We'll see." The words were simple, but inside her heart was racing, because he wasn't wrong. Still, she stayed, she endured. There were victories, too. Days when her shots at 3,000 meters landed near perfect. When Rodriguez gave the slightest nod of approval. When other trainees began asking her for notes, studying her methods quietly. She was earning ground inch by inch. But the pressure never lifted. Every drill was shadowed by the unspoken question, "Can you make the shot?" The week of the qualification, the air itself seemed heavier. Trainees whispered less, laughed less. They sharpened into silence, each of them carrying the same weight. Some masked it with bravado, others with nervous energy. Sarah carried hers quietly, like a stone in her chest. Rodriguez called them together one cold morning. Frost clung to the valley grass, and their breaths hung white in the air. He looked at them like a man measuring timber for strength. "This is the week," he said. "Conditions will decide the exact day. You don't choose the environment, it chooses you. When your name is called, you'll have one shot, one chance. At 3,800 meters, there is no second try." The words dropped like a hammer. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the barracks ceiling. She thought of her father, how he'd sat with her as a teenager, showing her how to clean a rifle, his voice patient even when hers trembled with inexperience. He never demanded perfection, but he demanded honesty. If you miss, own it. If you hit, stay humble. Dignity isn't noise, it's consistency. She wished he could see her now. She wished he could tell her if she was ready. The morning came colder than the rest. Variable winds, cross gusts teasing the valley floor. Rodriguez gathered them at the operations building, his expression unreadable. "Martinez," he said, "you're up." Her heart slammed once hard. She stood, rifle case in hand, boots steady despite the weight in her chest. The range stretched before her, endless and indifferent. At the far end, the target was no more than a ghost in the scope, a speck nearly swallowed by the horizon. Rodriguez's words echoed, "You won't always get perfect conditions. Real shooters adapt." Sarah set her rifle on the bench. Her custom system was calibrated, familiar, but upgraded with the program's tech. Still, she felt the cold steel under her palms as if it were a living thing. She adjusted the bipod, checked the scope. Williams monitored from behind, eyes narrowed, waiting. She closed her eyes, breathed once, twice, felt the ground under her body, the stock against her shoulder, the thin mountain air in her lungs. Every moment of training, every bruise, every doubt led to this point. Her finger hovered near the trigger, and the valley held its breath. Why did the trigger feel heavier than it had 1,000 times before? Sarah's finger rested just beside it, the cold curve of steel waiting. The scope magnified the world into a fragile circle. Inside it, the target at 3,800 meters shimmered like a mirage, a speck half lost in the morning haze. Her heart was too loud. She forced herself to breathe steady, slow. In, hold, out. Each breath carried the weight of months, of years. She remembered Rodriguez's voice. "Respect the distance. Respect the wind. Respect yourself." Data scrolled across the ballistic computer, numbers shifting as gusts teased the valley floor. Williams called out corrections in clipped tones, but Sarah barely heard him. This moment wasn't about him, or Rodriguez, or even the other trainees watching. It was about her father. She saw him crouched beside her in memory, hands steady as he showed her how to read mirage lines, his patience infinite. "Don't fight the rifle," he'd whispered. "Listen to it. Let it tell you where it wants to send the round." Her throat tightened. She steadied herself against the memory instead of fleeing from it. Wind gust, she adjusted, slight left, small correction. The valley was silent. Even the mountains seemed to wait. Finally, she let her finger touch the trigger. Not pulling, not pressing, just settling. She exhaled. The world narrowed to a single motion. The rifle thundered. Recoil slammed into her shoulder, deep but expected. She held position, frozen, eyes glued to the scope. Time slowed. 4 long seconds stretched like a lifetime. She tracked the faint vapor trail through the glass, her breath caught somewhere between lungs. The speck of a target stayed impossibly small. Her pulse roared. Did I calculate right? Did the wind shift? Did I? A puff of dust, then the monitor lit green. Rodriguez's voice cut through the silence, calm but with a rare edge of pride. Center ring. For a second, Sarah didn't move. She thought she'd misheard. Then the reality crashed into her. Center ring at 3,800 meters. Her body shook, not from recoil, but from release. Months of doubt, nights of study, mornings of exhaustion, all collapsing into a single moment of proof. She'd done it. Rodriguez leaned in, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. Congratulations. You just joined a group smaller than 50 people on this planet. Williams checked the monitor, lips pressed thin. No smirk this time, just quiet respect, reluctant but real. The others in the room erupted into scattered applause, not loud but enough. Sarah stayed still. She couldn't move yet. She needed to feel it sink in, the reality that she'd crossed the line she thought untouchable. But even in triumph, something deeper stirred inside her. A question she hadn't asked before. Why me? Why was this opportunity given? Because shots like this weren't just for trophies. Marcus had said that. Rodriguez had repeated it in his own way. This wasn't about targets. It was about missions where failure couldn't exist. The pride she felt was real, but so was the weight. That evening, she walked alone to the edge of the compound. The sun was bleeding orange into the mountains, the air thin and sharp. She sat with her rifle across her lap, not to clean it this time, but just to feel its weight. She thought about what the shot meant. To others, it was proof of her skill. To herself, it was more complicated. It was her father's lesson alive again. It was the end of one life, the Montana gunsmith, and the first step into another she couldn't fully see. Rodriguez found her there. He didn't sit. He didn't need to. Most people never reach that distance, he said. You did, but don't mistake today for an ending. It's just the doorway. She nodded slowly. Doorway to what? His pause was deliberate. To responsibilities you can't yet imagine. Precision like yours, it's not just skill. It's a weapon, and weapons always get used. The words lingered long after he walked away. Inside, she felt both triumph and unease. The pride of belonging, yes, but also the quiet, rising fear of what came next. Because making the shot was one thing, living with where it might lead was another. Why did victory feel heavier than failure? Sarah had expected relief after her 3,800-meter shot. She'd imagined walking taller, the doubts silenced, the judgment from men like Williams finally gone. And in some ways, it was true. Nobody questioned her place in the program now. The smirks vanished. The silence that once held doubt now carried respect. But respect came with shadows. Because the very next morning, the tone shifted. Rodriguez didn't congratulate her again. He didn't even mention the shot. Instead, he opened the briefing room with a single phrase. Now we train for the world beyond paper targets. The lessons grew harsher. Not just ballistics, but scenario drills, moving targets, timed shots, unpredictable weather. They set up simulations where missing wasn't just a mark on a monitor, it meant failure in a situation scripted to feel real. Hostage silhouettes, critical countdowns, life or death decisions where she had seconds to act. And every time she pulled the trigger, the question echoed in her chest. What if this were real? At night, she replayed Rodriguez's warning. Weapons always get used. The other trainees talked about it openly. Some had already been in places where their shots mattered. They swapped stories in low voices over dinner, rooftops in desert cities, tree lines in foreign mountains. They spoke not with bravado, but with the weight of people who had seen what their precision could change. Sarah stayed quiet. She wasn't one of them, not yet. But the silence didn't protect her from the thought. If she stayed on this path, she would be. One evening, Marcus returned. She hadn't seen him since the day she called to say yes. He walked into the compound like a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Trainees straightened when they saw him. He asked for Sarah, privately. They met in a small room off the operations center. He studied her with that same calm intensity as in Montana, only now she realized it wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. "You've done well," he said. "Rodriguez speaks highly of you, more highly than he speaks of most." Sarah shifted, unsure how to answer. Compliments from men like Rodriguez weren't given freely. "I've learned a lot." Marcus nodded. "But learning isn't the point, application is. You've reached a level where opportunities open, and choices." There it was again, choices. He let the word hang in the air like a trap. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked carefully. Marcus didn't give specifics. He never did. Instead, he laid out possibilities like pieces on a board. Government projects, private contracts, situations where a shot like yours could save lives or change them. Her chest tightened. "You mean missions?" He didn't deny it. "You didn't come here for trophies. You came here because you wanted to see how far you could go. Now you've gone that far. The question is, what will you do with it?" Sarah stared at him. Part of her wanted clarity, a straight answer, but the other part knew. Clarity was a luxury people in his world didn't offer. After he left, she sat in the quiet room long after, her hands clenched on the table. The pride of her achievement still glowed, but now it mixed with unease. Pride said, "You belong." Unease whispered, "Belonging has a cost." Days blurred again. Training pushed harder, drilling them in pairs and teams. She learned to coordinate, to cover angles, to anticipate wind not just for her own shot but for another's. Rodriguez drove them like a conductor with an orchestra, unforgiving, relentless. But when the day ended, when sweat still stung her eyes and her body begged for rest, Sarah found herself haunted by different questions. Could she take a shot knowing someone's life was on the other end? Not a steel plate, not a painted silhouette, a person. She remembered her father again. His lessons were always about respect for the weapon, for the craft, for the responsibility. He'd never glamorized what his rifle had done in war. In fact, he almost never spoke of it. And maybe that silence was the truest lesson of all. Dignity didn't brag. Dignity carried weight quietly. The first time Rodriguez staged a live simulation with actors, Sarah froze. Through the scope, the figure looked real, moved real. She had seconds to act. Training screamed at her to execute, but her finger hesitated for just a fraction. The shot still landed, but Rodriguez saw the pause. Later he pulled her aside. His eyes weren't angry, they were searching. "You hesitated," he said. Sarah's throat was dry, because it wasn't just a target. Rodriguez nodded once. "Good, never forget that. But know this, hesitation in the wrong moment costs lives too." The words cut both ways. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk, her rifle in pieces before her, cleaning it like she always did when her thoughts tangled. Piece by piece, cloth against steel, the ritual slowed her breathing. But nothing could wipe away the truth. She had crossed into territory where shots meant more than skill. They meant consequence. By the third month she was different. Not just sharper, but harder. She could run farther, shoot faster, calculate instinctively. Her body bore the signs, bruises, calluses, the quiet ache of muscles that had been pushed past their limits and rebuilt. But her eyes carried something else, a weight that hadn't been there in Montana, the knowledge that she was no longer simply a gunsmith's daughter. She was something others would use, maybe as a tool, maybe as a shield, maybe as a weapon. Rodriguez noticed. One evening, as they broke down after a long session, he said quietly, "Skill without conscience is dangerous. Conscience without skill is useless. You're walking the line. Don't lose it." Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Because she knew the truth. That line was thinner than anyone admitted. And soon, she would have to decide which side of it she stood on. Why did the valley feel safer than the real world? Training was brutal, yes. The altitude runs, the endless drills, Rodriguez's piercing eyes. But in truth, Sarah realized the range was predictable. Targets didn't bleed. Numbers didn't argue. Equations couldn't look back at you. The world beyond the compound was different. She learned that when Marcus returned again, weeks later. His arrival shifted the air like a storm front. This time, he didn't waste time on pleasantries. He gathered Sarah and 3 others in a briefing room. A map was already pinned on the wall, coordinates marked in red. "This is not an exercise," he said plainly. "It's observation, support, nothing more. You're not pulling triggers unless instructed, but you'll see what this training is really for." Sarah felt the words hit her gut. Not an exercise, observation. She looked at the map, foreign terrain, names she didn't recognize, a country she'd only ever read about in news headlines. Rodriguez added his piece. "You won't be in front, you'll be overwatch. Eyes first, rifles second. But make no mistake, this is where you learn what your decisions mean." The flight over was long, silent. Each of them carried their gear with the ritual care of people who knew weight could save or damn. Sarah sat by the window, staring at the endless clouds, her mind circling the same thought. This isn't Montana anymore. This isn't a paper target. They landed under cover of night, ferried by unmarked vehicles to a safe house that smelled of dust and tension. Locals moved in silence, their faces wary, eyes scanning shadows. Sarah kept her rifle case closed, her heartbeat louder than the street noise outside. The mission parameters were simple on paper. Provide long-range overwatch for a team meeting with local contacts. The ground team would walk into uncertain territory. Sarah and Williams, paired together for the first time, would set up in a high position, ready if anything went wrong. But paper never tells the truth of a situation. They climbed into a half-ruined building at dawn, the kind of place where plaster crumbled under your boots and every step echoed too loudly. From the roof, Sarah laid prone, unfolding her bipod, the valley of streets below sprawling into view. Her scope painted the world in glass, children darting across alleys, old men sweeping dust from stone steps, stray dogs weaving between carts. The ordinariness of life clashed with the tension in her chest. Williams lay beside her, his movements efficient, professional. For once, he didn't question her presence. He just worked. "Sector left is yours," he muttered. She nodded, scanning, adjusting, cataloging. Every rooftop, every shadow, every window where curtains twitched. The team moved below, tiny figures from this height. She tracked them instinctively, her crosshairs ghosting over helmets she prayed she'd never need to protect with fire. Minutes stretched into hours. Heat shimmered. Her body stiffened, but her mind sharpened. This was the edge Rodriguez had drilled into them. And then it shifted. Movement not casual, not local. 3 men on a rooftop 2 blocks down, their posture wrong, their eyes locked too long on the meeting below. One of them carried something wrapped, too heavy to be innocent. Her pulse quickened. "Possible armed overwatch, rooftop 2 blocks northeast," she whispered into comms. Rodriguez's voice came back, calm as ever. "Confirm before escalation." She magnified, studied. The man shifted, the cloth slipped, barrel glinted in sunlight. "Confirmed." The order didn't come immediately. Ground team was still exposed, talking, unaware of the eyes above them. And then Rodriguez's voice, "Martinez, you're clear." Her chest froze. Clear, permission. This wasn't a simulation anymore. Through her scope, the man was a silhouette, breathing, shifting. Not steel, flesh. She remembered her hesitation during training, the pause that Rodriguez had warned about. She felt it again now, a pressure between her ribs. This wasn't about skill, it was about consequence. One motion and a life would end. Her finger hovered. The numbers in her head lined up perfectly. Wind calm, distance steady, trigger crisp. She had every reason to succeed. But another voice whispered, "Once you fire, you can't take it back." William spoke beside her, sharp. "He's sighting in, take it." Sarah exhaled, slow, smooth. Her father's voice in memory, dignity isn't noise, it's action when it matters. She pressed the trigger. The recoil kicked, 4 seconds stretched. The rooftop figure dropped, weapon clattering. The radio crackled. Ground team shouted, moving fast, pulling away from the meeting. Chaos rippled through the streets. Sarah tracked for follow-ups, heart hammering, scope sweeping. 2 more figures scattered from the rooftop, fleeing into the maze of alleys. Williams confirmed. Threat neutralized, Overwatch stable. But Sarah barely heard him. Her hands were steady, too steady, and that steadiness frightened her more than the shot itself. Because she'd just crossed the line she'd wondered about for months. No simulation, no steel plate, a real person, a real ending. That night back at the safe house, she cleaned her rifle in silence. Cloth against steel, the ritual that had once soothed her now felt heavier. She thought of the man on the rooftop. She didn't know his name, his reasons, only that she had been faster. Rodriguez stopped by as she worked. His gaze was unreadable. "You did what was required. The team is alive because of it." Sarah didn't look up, but it doesn't feel like victory. Rodriguez's pause was long, measured. It never should. He left her with that truth. She sat alone, rifle parts gleaming under a dim lamp. Her hands moved methodically, but her mind churned. She had proven she could take the shot, but now she had to live with what that meant. And she wasn't sure which was harder. Why did silence feel different now? Back in Montana, silence had been peace. The steady scrape of cloth against steel, the soft tick of the shop clock, the kind of quiet that carried comfort. But now, after months of training, after the mission, silence felt heavier. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memory, of weight, of the sound of a shot she couldn't take back. The compound in Colorado welcomed her return with the same routine: 4 a.m. runs, long hours on the range, lectures and drills. But Sarah wasn't the same woman who'd walked into the valley months ago. She carried herself differently. Others noticed. Even Williams treated her with something like respect, grudging but real. Rodriguez saw it too. During one debrief, he studied her across the table. "You've crossed the line," he said. "Not everyone comes back from their first mission steady. You did. That tells me 2 things." She waited, bracing for judgment. "1," he continued, "you have the discipline to function under pressure. 2, and more important, you still feel it. You still carry the weight. Don't lose that. Shooters who stop feeling it, they don't last long, not in body, not in spirit." His words echoed the ones her father might have said. Her father, who had taught her to respect every round, to never treat a rifle as anything less than a promise. In quiet moments, she found herself remembering Montana, the smell of oil and solvent, the hum of the range back home. The way she'd once believed shooting was about precision alone, about pushing skill to the edge of possibility. She hadn't been wrong, but she hadn't known the whole truth either. Precision was not just art, it was burden. She realized now that every skill carries responsibility. When the world puts a tool in your hands, it also puts a question in your heart. What will you do with it? Sarah wrestled with that question for weeks. She could stay in the program. Missions would come. More rooftops, more targets, more lives balanced on the pull of her finger. She could also walk away. Return to Montana. Fix rifles for ranchers. Live quietly. Pretend this chapter had been nothing more than an experiment. But the truth, she couldn't go back to who she was, not fully. Because once you've looked through glass and seen how far your reach truly goes, You can't unsee it. Marcus appeared again near the end of her training cycle, his presence as sharp as ever. He asked no small talk. You've done what few can. Now it's time to decide. Will you continue? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She studied him, studied the card he'd once handed her, the plain lettering that had changed her life. I don't know yet, she admitted. I know I can, I know what it means, but I need to decide what it means for me. Marcus didn't push, he just nodded once. Then think carefully, you've earned that right. That night Sarah sat in her bunk, her rifle across her lap. She cleaned it slowly, carefully, each pass of the cloth steady. It was the same ritual she'd known all her life, but tonight it carried a new meaning. She wasn't just keeping steel spotless. She was reminding herself of who she was, of where she came from. Montana, her father. The girl who had once stayed quiet at the back of a shop while veterans walked in, never realizing she was already walking toward a future they couldn't see. And now here she was, a woman who could reach across valleys, across miles, across borders, who had proven herself among the best, who had learned that strength wasn't in pulling the trigger, it was in knowing when you should and when you shouldn't. When she finally returned home months later, the shop looked smaller. The bell above the door chimed the same way, the rifles still lined the walls. Customers came and went just like before, but Sarah was different. She cleaned rifles again, methodical, precise. She listened to the quiet, but this time she heard more in it. She heard the weight of what she'd learned, the echo of what she'd done. People asked where she'd been. She gave no details. She didn't need to. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't brag. It doesn't need to. It carries on silently, with steady hands and a clear conscience. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.